Well, welcome everyone. Thank you to those of you who made an introduction in the chat. I'm Melody Garcia with the Growing Readers Together Project, an initiative of the Colorado State Library. And I'm joined today with Laura Lay, a senior literacy consultant with the Colorado Department of Education. Thank you for joining us for this session of GRT Quick Bites, 20-minute topics in early learning. These micro-learning opportunities are intended to amp up your early literacy programs and help you shine a light on early learning. Today we'll be talking about books for beginning and struggling readers. And just a little background on the Growing Readers Together program. So in Colorado today, it's estimated up to 57% of children under 6 are cared for by family, friends, and neighbors, referred to as FFN caregivers. And this percentage of children cared for informally tends to increase in small towns, mountain towns, and rural areas with less access to professional care. So Growing Readers Together prioritizes library services to these family, friend, and neighbor caregivers. And over the past years, participating libraries have connected with this group and expanded their early literacy knowledge and access. It is our hope that by making early literacy intentional, transparent, and accessible in all Colorado libraries, every child can have access to early learning opportunities, regardless of their care situation. And this is the Growing Readers Together team, but we have a special guest today, Laura Lay, who comes to us from the preschool through 3rd grade office of the Colorado Department of Education to talk to us about how to support these children as they start moving into the early years of school and really begin to become independent readers. So I will turn things over to Laura.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. So I am Laura Lay. We're going to talk today about learning to read and supporting our earliest readers as they're doing the hard work of developing and practicing their newly learned skills. I'm going to put in the chat the link to a Google folder. It has a handout that has the slides that I am presenting today, as well as additional notes and links to other resources, since we do only have 20 minutes today. But since our time is brief, I'm going to briefly discuss the stages of reading development, guessing versus reading habits, the joy of successful early reading, and then using different books for different purposes. And so that link is in the chat if you want to access those handouts. But I'm going to start off with talking about this reading rope model. We're using this to help us visualize the process of learning to read. And so as individuals are learning to read, they are developing the skills that are depicted here as strands in a rope. The top set of skills in red are our language comprehension skills. So these skills include developing background knowledge and learning about the world around us, developing vocabulary, learning about the structure of our language, verbal reasoning skills, and literacy knowledge. The bottom of the rope in blue here are our word recognition skills. And so our word recognition skills include phonological awareness skills, which is the ability to identify and manipulate units of sound in the language, decoding skills, which would be matching sounds, those sounds that you're learning in phonological awareness with the letters that are representing them, and then the ability to read the words on the page. And then finally, the increasing number of words that we can instantly recognize as we're building those skills is known as sight recognition. And so for successful skilled reading, what we see here on the right, where the rope is tightly woven together, students need to develop all of those skills to get to that successful reading, skilled reading area. And so as readers are developing strong language comprehension skills, they're applying those skills in increasingly strategic ways. So this might be identifying the correct definition of a word for words that have multiple meanings, or for students being metacognitive and identifying when they haven't quite understood what they're reading, and going back, rereading, applying fix-up strategies. And then as readers are developing these bottom skills in blue here, these word recognition skills, those skills are becoming increasingly automatic, meaning that students are accurately and fluently reading the words on the page, which then allows the reader to really focus on what they're reading and, our overall goal of reading comprehension, understanding what they're reading. And so here I've just overlaid the stages of reading onto this rope model to really help us think about the process and the stages that readers go through. My focus today is really going to be on our earliest readers in the stage 1 here, the initial reading and decoding, and how we can support those students. But we start with stage 0, our pre-reading stage here in green. This is our early literacy area. So from birth to around 5, we're talking, reading to, engaging in nursery rhymes and song to develop really both skills at the top and the bottom of the rope, because children are not yet reading independently at this in this stage. And then related to more to the bottom of the rope during this stage, children are beginning to name letters, maybe beginning to identify those sound symbol correspondences. They maybe are recognizing some words. They're beginning to understand phonological awareness concepts like rhyming and alliteration, identifying that sentences are made up of words, and engaging in wordplay. So from this early literacy stage, this stage 0, we move into our early reading stage, stage 1. It's the initial reading and decoding stage. This is when students are learning to read in school. And so it's typically around 1st grade and moving into 2nd grade. The age and the grades are approximations based on typical development, but some students will be in this initial reading stage before 1st grade and move into stage 2 before the end of 1st grade. Some students will remain in this stage for longer until they receive proper instruction or remediation. And so during the initial reading and decoding stage, students understand the sound symbol correlations necessary to begin to read words. They can analyze simple words from their individual parts, their letters, and blending them into those sounds into the whole word. They can also analyze words from the whole and break it into parts. That's a basic skill needed for spelling. And so it's important during this stage to set a student's reading reflex or their go-to reading strategy as using their decoding skills rather than guessing. So we're going to talk about reading versus guessing and how to support decoding as the go-to strategy in the upcoming slides. And so if you're looking at this reading rope model, we'll notice that these are initially in this stage separate. Because, language comprehension skills for students at this stage, they are at a much higher text level than what a student can read on their own. And so those skills are built during this time through read alouds and engaging in conversations. And then the skills at the bottom of the rope are built and practiced through text that is appropriate for reinforcing those decoding skills. Oh, just gonna head back up to this for a second. So this crucial stage that we're talking about, as students are progressing in their skills, then they're moving on to stage 2, which is our confirmation and fluency stage, where students have typically mastered their phonological awareness and basic phonics skills. So students are reading accurately, they're reading fluently, they're able to tackle age-appropriate books independently. And then students continue to build their reading skills as they progress through these next reading stages, which culminates in stage 5, which is when reading is more efficient than listening. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about setting that reading reflex for decoding. So students need to use their decoding skills as their go-to reading strategy, or it may impact their reading skill development. So there are common instructional practices that do not align with the science of reading that encourage students to guess rather than decode. These habits are extremely difficult to break, and they undermine the development of decoding skills. And so this is a quote from a teacher who is discussing this. She said, "It was so hard to ever get them to stop looking at the picture to guess what a word would be. It was so hard to get them to slow down and sound a word out because they had this experience of reading as being easy." And so in the handout, there is a link to the article that includes that quote if you want to look at that. But we're going to move into talking about 4 types of word guessers. And so this is explained through this video. I just need to share my sound.
Does your child guess at unknown words instead of sounding them out? It's actually a pretty common problem. In fact, there are 4 types of word guessers. Some kids guess what a word is by looking at the first letter in the word.
Horse.
Oops, missed the mark on that one. The second type of word guesser looks at the basic shape of the word and takes a wild guess.
Maybe.
Maple and maybe do have similar shapes, but that's not quite the word we're looking for. Some kids look at pictures for clues.
The angry dog barked at the cat.
The child does not recognize the word scary, but he sees a picture of an angry-looking dog and fills in the word angry. Almost, but not quite. The last type of guesser uses context clues to guess a missing word.
The farmer bought grain for his chickens.
Context clues can help, but they don't always result in the correct word. What type of word guesser is your child?
Okay, so those are our 4 types of word guessers. So students who rely on guessing like this might be successful initially, but they will suffer as they begin to read more complex texts if they have not developed solid decoding skills. So what we do want to do is we want to bolster success for early readers. So reading success for early readers is essential in building confidence, in building joy, allowing children to see themselves as readers. Low reading self-concept begins as early as the end of 1st grade. And so libraries can support early reading success by providing appropriate early reading materials for students to practice independent reading. So this isn't the only type of engagement of books that we want to see or that's important at this stage, but it is important for students to be able to read a whole book successfully. And that's really important in them seeing themselves as readers and knowing that they are applying skills that they've learned. So decodable books are an avenue for students to experience success without guessing or becoming frustrated. It's not incompatible with calls for real or authentic text. Shared reading can and must continue with texts that challenge, inspire, and bring joy. And so this is just an example of using different texts for different purposes. And so decodable books are books that a student can decode. And so for our earliest readers, it might look like something in this example. So books published specifically as decodable books, like this example, are purposeful and temporary supports. They enable readers to sound out words rather than guess unknown words, and sets decoding as the primary reading strategy, which leads to more successful independent reading. So research finds that children are more likely to apply their phonics knowledge, read more accurately, and need less assistance when reading decodable books. Students who are accelerated in their reading skills may not need this type of support. So students who are able to read more complex books independently without guessing or becoming frustrated should. But for many students, decodable texts are a necessary step towards reading authentic texts on their own and can be thought of like training wheels on a bike. So something that's a temporary scaffold. And we're really just talking about practicing independent reading. We still want students to engage with books of their choice for pleasure reading and engage in read alouds in school and at home with parents. And so this is an example of using different texts for different purposes. And so sometimes people ask, where's the joy in decodable books? And so for many students, being able to read a whole book is joy. And so there is a difference between enjoying stories and enjoying reading. Both are ideal. Students who struggle or who cannot read often do not enjoy it. I would say probably students who cannot read do not enjoy it. But students who struggle it's really difficult to enjoy something that is difficult. And so research shows a unidirectional influence on literacy skills on enjoyment. And so better readers are more motivated to read, including finding reading enjoyable and engaging in reading more often. And it doesn't work the other way around. So this is really important information to know as librarians, because I think there's often a thought that we just need to find the right book to hook students. But students also need effective literacy instruction in the classroom. So often we do need to do that. We do need to find the right book for students and get them hooked, but they also need to have those solid reading skills. And so it's important that we're not perpetuating any myths about reading so that students can get the help they need. And so just emphasizing here that this is not a call to weed any books from your collection, but it is a call to be thoughtful about your collection. And if your collection has books that are supportive of all readers, we don't want to restrict reading, but we do want to make sure our collections are inclusive for readers at different levels of reading development. So don't weed any books based on this information. And so this is just kind of like a recipe that I came up with for like what I think a recipe for successful and joyful reading should be. And it should include all these. So students need effective reading instruction in school. And so this is the job of the school, not the library. But as librarians, it's helpful to understand what this looks like and to make sure that we're not spreading harmful myths about reading. So we should not perpetuate misinformation such as reading being a natural process, or the idea of late bloomers and that children will just catch up, or that a child has just not found the right book. But we can and do play a vital role in creating and promoting joyful early reading experiences, providing access to interesting and engaging books, providing access to diverse books at various levels of decodability. So I think that is part of a diverse collection, is those various levels of decodability, and then promoting book choice as that important part of a library experience. And so I would argue that libraries and librarians are already doing an excellent job of most of these things already, but only small changes need to take place to ensure inclusion and improve practice. And so I have just a couple takeaways here. I think they are in the chat. So there's the read, don't guess bookmark. And so something that I tell students that I work with when they guess is that we have to go back and rescue the word from the guessing goblin. And then I prompt them to use their skills to sound out a word. So these bookmarks, the link is in the chat right now. They can be printed out and put out as a tool to help guide parents with children who are in that early reading stage. And then I also created some decodable book lists from books that are already in your collections. And so these links go to the Prospector catalog. Some of the links go to Hoopla, which I know not all libraries have, but also included because right now our decodable resources are fairly scarce, and I wanted to include those for libraries who do have access to Hoopla. So let me just put that link in the chat. And so thanks for being here and listening on this brief topic about students as they progress through their reading skills. And then I'm here for questions if you have them.
So Laura, we did have a question earlier on when you were discussing like not using the pictures for guessing and things like that. There was a question about, you know, the skill of dialogic reading when we read to kids, and whether that's something we should steer away from because it's promoting that guessing.
It's not I guess it depends on how you're using dialogic reading, but that's not my understanding of what dialogic reading would be. It would be like having a dialogue about what you are reading in a read aloud practice. And that's absolutely something that we want to take place. We want, you know, when students are engaging with books in a read aloud, those are often books that are at a more complex level than a student can tackle on their own. And that's when they are building those top skills on the reading rope, those language comprehension skills.
And Emily's clarifying a little bit, and please feel free to unmute Emily. I don't want to misrepresent your question, so feel free to chime in. But she had typed that she meant more so in allowing children to tell you the story based on the pictures.
I mean, I would say like as far as instruction, I don't think that that's necessarily a bad idea. Like as far as instruction goes, like we move away from practices that are doing like a picture walk, because then it's like placing a lot of emphasis on using the pictures to read when the reading takes place. But I think that if you are engaging with a child in a book and you are having them tell you a story based on the pictures, there are benefits to that, of having that conversation and building those language comprehension skills. But we just want to make sure that they then aren't using those pictures to guess the words rather than read the words.
And then there was another question, if you could clarify what you mean by diverse books.
So I think that we need diverse books in all aspects. We need those books that are the mirrors and the windows and the sliding glass doors. We need students to be able to see themselves in the books that they that they are reading, and we need them to be able to look into other worlds that may not represent their own life experience. But if we're talking about inclusive collections, a diverse collection should also include books that are at different levels of decodability. So we have lots and lots of books for students who are solid with their reading skills, who are able to read. And I think that we have fewer books for students who are just learning to read. And so if we are thinking about inclusion, and if our collections are inclusive, that should be part of that conversation.
And Laura, I have a question. If you have any suggestions on how libraries can make these like entry-level decodable books more findable on their shelf without completely, redoing their shelving.
Yeah, and so, I think there are a lot of different ways that you can do this. You could create like a section that would be a place that you could point patrons to. You could include like a local subject heading in your catalog so that you could pull those up quickly. If you think about like the Bob books, those would be decodable books. Or if you have a smaller collection, I've seen libraries like just put like baskets on top of shelves. So like as a quick place to find those. You could also, label them, but I think there's different ways that you could do that.
Yeah, and someone in the chat is saying that they're looking at putting them in the 400 section of their library, so in that like instructional areas in nonfiction. I think it just also depends on like where that is in your library, like how accessible is that and findable with the kids who are reading.
Or if you have like a series, I don't even know that you could just be able like, have your librarians know what books, like a specific series would be like good for a decodable, like the Bob books, or like an example would be like Little Blossom Readers. Any other? Many easy, I see in the chat, there's a question, are easy readers considered decodable? Some are and some are not. And so we often see in our easy reader collections, just like patterned books that have a sentence stem and then a picture that supports guessing the last word. And those often include really difficult words for beginning readers to decode. And so some are not. Another question, how can we encourage parents in helping their children in learning to read when they struggle with reading themselves? Yeah, that's a great question. So this is how I kind of came into this through an adult literacy program. So I've worked with both children and youth who struggle with learning to read. And so when I started at San Francisco Public Library, I was initially primarily working with the adult literacy population, but we really, reading struggles are often hereditary. So students who have parents who struggle to read are more likely to struggle to read themselves. And so we were looking at ways where we could have wraparound service and help those parents and also help the children in the libraries. But as far as helping and encouraging parents who are struggling on their own, reading instruction should happen in school, and we're hoping that that practice is going to improve as we are advocating for better practices. And so for parents who struggle and may not be able to engage with their children at home, I just really encourage like audiobooks as an avenue for them to engage in stories with their kiddos. A book is going to have a much more robust vocabulary than what we engage in our normal everyday talk or a TV show. And so students are also learning about sentence structure and how sentences are formed, and that's often more you're often going to have like more complex sentence structure in a book, in an audiobook, rather than a TV show. So encouraging audiobooks, and then if there are resources that you can connect them with in your communities, that as well. Okay, any other questions?
Thank you so much, Laura, and thank you everyone for joining us. I just dropped a link to a survey. I'll drop it in one more time. And then if questions do continue to come up, we're always here for a few extra minutes. So if you've got that burning question, feel free to stick around and ask. But thank you all so much for joining us for another Quick Bites.
Thanks, everyone.